They prayed for gods. But what arrived was thunder. In the 41st millennium, where faith had become both weapon and chain, the stars themselves were silent. Humanity, once the proud architect of empires, now crawled beneath the shadow of its own despair. The Imperium was no longer a kingdom of men, but a mausoleum of dreams, held together by devotion, fear, and blood. And yet, in the deep void beyond known stars, something stirred. The first sign was not seen, but heard. A single peal of thunder, rolling across the endless dark, as though the heavens themselves had cracked under the weight of eternity. No ship, no warp signature, no known celestial event, just a tremor in the soul of the galaxy. Astropaths screamed. Oracles clawed their eyes blind. Even the dead stirred in their crypts of iron. For an instant, every priest of the god emperor looked skyward and whispered the same word. Him. Not the emperor, not a primarch, but something older. Freer, they called him Thor. No one knew from where he came, only that he fell from a tear in the warp of the dying world of Vandros Ix, a planet where the last untainted humans lived in hiding, their existence a heresy, punishable by extinction. Vandros was a graveyard of steel, where the sky bled ash and the ground drank the tears of children born in bondage. For centuries, they had survived, hunted by Mechanicus patrols who sought genetic purity, by inquisitors who saw corruption in every living cell, by hunger itself. And on the day the last of them were to be burned for their defiance, the storm came. Witnesses spoke of clouds splitting open, of light so pure it cast shadows that wept. A figure descended through the tempest, wreathed in lightning and fury. He bore no sigil of the Imperium, no aquila, no seal of Terra. Only a hammer, vast and alive, roaring with the memory of stars. When his feet struck the ground, the execution fires went out. The inquisitorial detachment stationed there, the Order of the Penitent Flame, reported the impossible. A single being walking through barrages of plasma fire, shrugging off meltablasts like rain, his eyes glowing with the sun's defiance. Each swing of his hammer shattered tanks, tore servitors apart, and sent echoes through the immaterium itself. Those who faced him described not rage, but grief, a god mourning his children. And when the thunder faded, thousands of slaves stood free, trembling, disbelieving. Thor looked upon them and wept. The Imperium called it a warp anomaly. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy incarnate. But the people, they called it salvation. For the first time in 10,000 years, the name of a god other than the emperor was spoken aloud in prayer. Quietly at first, in ruins and caves, between whispers of fear. But it spread, like fire in dry bones. And so the Inquisition declared a crusade. Thousands of ships, billions of souls, converged upon Vandros Ix to erase the blasphemy before it could take root. In orbit, the skies filled with war, battle barges, thunderhawks, and the roaring sermons of orbital cannons. The world below trembled beneath the weight of apocalypse. Thor did not flee. He raised his hammer, and the storm answered. They say he spoke only once to the Imperium. When the inquisitorial envoy descended, clad in relic armor and holy script, demanding his surrender, Thor approached through the ash storms, cloak tattered, eyes dim with sorrow. "You call yourselves the sons of man," he said, "yet you cage your children and call it faith." The envoy raised a relic pistol in response, invoking the emperor's name. Thor looked skyward. Lightning split the heavens. When the flash faded, there was only silence, and a crater where the envoy had stood. To the Inquisition, this was proof enough. A god had risen against God. To the people of Vandros, it was proof that perhaps, just perhaps, mercy could still walk the stars. Across the sector, whispers turned to riots. Entire hive cities began carving lightning bolts into their walls, their flesh, their banners. Pilgrims deserted their shrines, seeking this thunder god who did not demand obedience, only freedom. The ecclesiarchs screamed blasphemy, the Mechanicus demanded his study, and the space marines watched, for they too had heard the thunder. Among the Astartes, some felt a strange pull. Memories, not their own, of ancient sagas, of thunder and courage, of gods who once walked beside men. The wolves of Fenris, most of all, stirred uneasily. For in Thor's lightning, they saw something familiar. Some whispered the name Russ, and wondered if the storm had returned their lost father. Others feared worse, that the warp had birthed a new god to mock them all. The high lords of Terra convened. From the golden dust of the throne world, orders rippled across the galaxy. Thor was to be captured alive if possible, destroyed utterly if not. For the Emperor was a jealous god, and even in death, his worship allowed no rivals. On Vandros Ix, the storm darkened. For days, Thor stood among the survivors, teaching them to rebuild, to speak without fear, to remember that once humanity had sung songs to the stars instead of screaming to survive them. He held children in his arms, raised broken shelters with a sweep of his hand, and listened, truly listened, to their stories. To the Imperium, it was heresy. To them, it was hope. But hope is a dangerous thing. On the 7th day, the first fleet arrived. The sky filled with falling angels, the Adeptus Astartes. The Ultramarines descended first, their discipline unwavering. Behind them came the Sisters of Battle, chanting hymns loud enough to drown the wind. The survivors of Vandros trembled as they saw the silver and blue armor, the burning purity seals, the relic banners of the Emperor's name. Thor watched them come. He did not raise his hammer. He whispered instead, "If he truly loves them, may he forgive what must come next." The battle was a hymn of fire and thunder. Every bolt shell that struck Thor was answered with a stormbolt of lightning. Every sister that fell in faith fell beneath skies that wept for her courage. The Ultramarines advanced through hurricanes, reciting liturgies, their voices drowned by the crack of thunder. And yet Thor did not kill them all. Those who lay wounded, he spared. Those who prayed, he silenced only with sorrow. It was not conquest he sought. It was understanding. "Why do you kneel to a corpse?" he asked the dying captain, his armor shattered, his blood mingling with the rain. The captain, lips trembling, whispered, "Because he gave his life for us." Thor looked away. So did I. Then came the warp. It bled through the sky like oil through glass, twisting clouds into screaming faces. Something vast and cruel watched from beyond. For in that moment of defiance, the veil had been torn. The chaos gods had seen the thunder's light, and they hungered for it. To them, Thor was no god, no hero, only prey. From the rift above Vandros Ix, demons poured forth. The battle turned from holy war to apocalypse. Bloodletters danced upon molten streets. Plague drones feasted on the dead, and the air itself turned to poison and laughter. Thor roared, and the hammer answered. Every strike shattered Demonkind into vapor. Every storm he summoned burned corruption from the sky. But the warp does not tire. It learns. With every victory, they returned stronger, feeding on his fury, his grief, his compassion. And among the chaos, a voice whispered his name, old, mocking Serpentine. "Son of Odin, do you think your thunder reaches here?" It was Tzeentch, the architect of fate, speaking from the wound in reality. And in his voice was laughter that could unmake worlds. The skies split open once more. The Imperium ships fled, their faith collapsing into panic. The survivors of Vandros huddled beneath broken walls, praying to both gods, the old and the new, begging for deliverance. Thor stood at the heart of the storm, his body bleeding light, his eyes reflecting galaxies yet unborn. He turned to the humans he had saved, frail, trembling, alive, and for the first time his voice broke. "Hold on to your hope," he said, "even if the stars burn for it." Then he raised his hammer to the heavens, and the storm consumed him. In the aftermath, Vandros Ix was gone. Only glass remained, fused by lightning, carved by fire. The Inquisition recorded it as an unexplained warp incursion. The official story: no survivors, no witnesses. The thunder god erased from history. But among the drifting void prayers of refugee ships, there were those who still whispered, of a flash of light seen in the ruins, of a hammer embedded in stone, humming faintly, waiting. And somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, where stars die quietly, a voice of thunder murmured in the dark, "I am not done." Every thunder leaves an echo, and every echo remembers the storm. The Imperium thought Vandros Ix had died with its blasphemy, but in the void, nothing dies quietly. Fragments of that world drifted across the sector, blackened stones, fused cities, and among them, whispers. Vox signals that should not exist. The Mechanicus dismissed them as static, but Inquisitors listened deeper, and heard the faint heartbeat of something divine. The hammer still called. On the fortress world of Dathalin, 3 light years from Vandros, a sister of battle named Amara dreamt of thunder. In her sleep, she saw a hammer buried in glass, humming like a choir's breath. When she awoke, the air smelled of rain, a scent she hadn't known since childhood. She fell to her knees in her cell and wept, for it was a scent no world in the Imperium had known for centuries. The ecclesiarchy feared her visions. Prophecy was a dangerous contagion, and Amara's name was swiftly erased from the archives. But faith spreads faster than fire. Others began dreaming too. Soldiers, scribes, serfs. All saw the same thing. A storm on a dead world, and a god who refused to stay buried. At the same time, the High Lords of Terra convened again in the halls of ash, their faces hidden behind relic masks. Reports of the Thunder heresy had tripled. Whole regiments of guard were praying not to the Emperor, but to a nameless savior of light. One lord spoke plainly. If hope can change its name, it can also change its master. No one disagreed. So they sent a man who did not believe in gods, Lord Inquisitor Kael Varn of the Ordo Hereticus, cold, precise, and merciless. His task, find the echo of the thunder and silence it forever. He brought with him a fleet of faithless ships, stripped of iconography, armed only with silence and fear. Each bore the sigil of the blackened Aquila, the mark of absolute authority. Where Varn went, truth itself bled. When they reached the remnants of Vandros Ix, scanners went blind. The void shimmered like liquid glass. Tech priests whispered that time itself recoiled here. Varn stared through the viewport. Where the planet had once been was now a field of crystalline shards, each reflecting light that wasn't there. Deploy the dropships, he ordered. If the hammer sings, I will hear it. They descended through silence. No winds, no echoes. Even their boots made no sound upon the vitrified plains. And then the faint hum, low, steady, resonant. A pulse beneath the glass. The soldiers spread out, reverent despite themselves. Every shard glowed faintly as they passed, like ancient runes recognizing old blood. And at the heart of that dead world, half buried in molten stone, it waited. Mjolnir. It was smaller than legend had claimed. Weathered. Quiet. Yet the air around it bent, as though the hammer still carried the weight of gods. A soldier reached for it. His glove disintegrated. His hand followed. No scream, only ash on the wind. Varn watched, unflinching. Seal the sight, he said. No prayers. No names. Not even thought. But thought was already the infection. Within hours, half the battalion began hearing music. Not sound, memory. A chorus of storms, drums of distant thunder. A few wept openly, confessing visions of humanity unchained, of the Emperor smiling without pain. Others started chanting the name they did not understand. He who fell in light. Varn executed them all. But each shot echoed with lightning. On Terra, the warp began to stir. The Astronomicon flickered. Astropaths spoke in their sleep of a heart beating under glass. The Adeptus Custodes grew restless, watching the golden throne pulse irregularly, as if reacting to something beyond the Emperor's will. One of them, the ancient custodian Tyron Vale, broke the unthinkable silence. What if he is not alone? No one dared answer. Meanwhile, on Dathalin, Sister Amara had fled. Pursued by her own order, she carried a vision, a sigil of lightning, carved into her flesh by dream. She believed it was a calling, not a curse. She traveled through pilgrim routes, whispering of the Stormbringer who defied gods for mortals. And wherever she went, miracles followed. Broken machines hummed again. Plague victims awoke. Even the condemned found courage in her presence. The ecclesiarchy labeled her witch. The people called her the voice of thunder. Rumors of her reached Varn mid-expedition. His Vox officers intercepted the word Thor in coded transmissions, mixed with desperate hymns. The Inquisitor's jaw tightened. "Every faith begins with a name," he muttered. "Kill the name, and the faith dies with it." He ordered a detachment to find her. But the warp was restless. Messages returned corrupted, fragments of lightning, laughter, and prayers. And above them, unseen, the sky began to bleed light. It came first as static across the Vox. Then, a pulse strong enough to shatter sensors. The hammer began to glow. The dead glass hummed in unison. For a heartbeat, all across the galaxy, lightning flared in the void. And a voice whispered, "Remember me." Varn fell to his knees, blood seeping from his eyes. Every soldier screamed. Some clawed their ears, others simply stared into the light with awe. The hammer trembled, not to rise, but to wait. Something had awakened it. Across the segmentum solar, the Mechanicus detected impossible readings. Energy signatures that predated the birth of Terra's sun. Runes pulsing in harmonic sequence with the warp. They called it the echelon resonance, though none understood it. One Magos dared suggest it was communication, an invitation. For that, he was executed. His last words, "The thunder calls us home." Back on Terra, the High Lords quarreled. The Ecclesiarch demanded full planetary purges. The Fabricator General argued for containment and study. And beneath their feet, the Golden Throne groaned. The Emperor's body spasmed for the first time in millennia. Lights flared, Vox wards failed. The psychic scream that followed turned 1,000 scribes to dust. And yet, through the pain, one phrase was heard across every astropathic channel. "He remembers." In orbit over Vandra 6, Varn's fleet received the transmission seconds before it all went dark. The Vox officer's last words were trembling. The hammer. "It's not alone anymore." And silence. Varn awoke hours later, floating in the wreckage of his flagship. The sky above the glass planet was a storm of light. Not warp fire, not demonic. Something pure, something other. He heard a heartbeat again, not from within him, but beneath the planet. Slow, patient, alive. Meanwhile, Amara reached the shrine of the Weeping Saint, a cathedral half buried in salt dunes. Her body was weak, her mind fractured by visions. Yet she knew what she had to do. She placed her hand on the altar and prayed, not to the Emperor, but to the storm. "I don't ask for miracles," she whispered. "Only for truth." Lightning answered. Every stained window shattered inward, revealing a sky that burned white. Statues of saints wept molten tears. The ground trembled as the lightning formed symbols in the air, circles, runes, an ancient script no one had spoken since before mankind's first fire. Then, in the center of the light, a figure appeared, not flesh, not spirit, but memory. It looked at Amara, and it knew her name. "Why do you still kneel?" The voice asked, neither cruel nor kind. Amara trembled. "Because we were taught to." "Then rise," it said. The light vanished. The runes burned into the altar stone. And where the relic once stood, there now lay a fragment of something metallic, scorched, heavy, humming. A shard of the hammer. Varn found her hours later. His armor was cracked, his eyes hollow, but he recognized what she held. "That thing," he said, raising his weapon, "has killed gods and made more in the same breath." Amara didn't flinch. Maybe that's what gods are for. He hesitated, and in that heartbeat, lightning struck again. This time, it did not burn. It spoke. Images flooded them both. Stars dying, worlds reborn, the Emperor seated upon his throne, not as master, but as prisoner, chains of light bound to his heart. And a voice like the sound of creation whispered, he was never the only one. Varn staggered back, his faith shattering like glass. The air around them thrummed with forbidden revelation. Blasphemy, he gasped. Truth, she answered. And outside, the storm grew teeth. The fleet above Dathalon mutinied the next day. Half the commanders refused to fire upon Amara's followers, claiming to have seen light in the warp. The other half obeyed their orders. The bombardment turned the world into glass again. But something emerged from the fire. A sound, a pulse, a memory. The thunder returned. In the ruins, Varn crawled through ash. His armor was gone, his mind fractured. But in his chest, he felt something beating, slow, heavy, echoing with every heartbeat of the dying world. He looked down and saw the shard embedded in his armor. It pulsed faintly, glowing through his ribs. He laughed, a sound of both awe and horror. So this is how gods are made. Then he saw them. Figures walking through the glass, silhouettes of light, carrying hammers, their eyes like stars behind clouds. The Imperium would later call it the second fall of Vandros. Official records, lost fleet, minor heresy, no survivors. But in the silence between transmissions, some claimed they heard it. Faint, distant thunder echoing from beyond the segmentum. Others said they saw a light moving between the stars, not warp-born, not machine-made, something alive, carrying both vengeance and mercy. And those who had once dreamed of Thor began to dream again. Somewhere in the void, a voice whispered, neither divine nor damned, but achingly human. If gods cannot save man, then let man remember how to save himself. Then came silence. And from that silence, the sound of a hammer striking once more. Faith is the flame that warms or burns, and in the darkness of the far future, it does both at once. The storm of Vandros spread like a contagion. Across the Imperium's night, worlds began to flicker, small revolts, whispered hymns, prayers that no longer ended with the Emperor's name. The Ecclesiarchy called it the fracture of tongues. The Inquisition called it the echo heresy. But to the common man, it was something simpler, hope rediscovered. On the shrine world of Ithilien, pilgrims once knelt before statues of the Emperor, carved from obsidian. Now, cracks spread across those faces, and through them, light. Some said they could hear the sound of thunder faintly humming within the stone, as if the marble itself remembered the storm. Priests smashed their altars to silence it, but faith, once freed, cannot be chained again. The Inquisition burned thousands to restore order. Cathedrals became pyres, prayers became executions. Yet even as the flames rose, the condemned smiled. For they dreamed of rain, real rain, the kind that did not sting like acid. To die with that vision was victory enough. Lord Inquisitor Kael Varn lived. Scarred and half-mad, he drifted in the Medicae decks of the battle barge Sanctum Virae. The shard of the hammer pulsed within his chest like a second heart. The tech priests whispered that it was killing him. The astropaths whispered that it was changing him. At night, he dreamt of stars weeping. And in every dream, the voice of thunder spoke softly. You have seen your god's chains. Now choose whether to break them. Varn awoke one night screaming the Emperor's name, and the ship's lights shattered. Warp currents howled. Crew bled from their eyes. In that chaos, the hammer's shard glowed bright enough to blind. When the light faded, Varn stood unaided for the first time in weeks. The shard no longer glowed. It beat. He locked himself within the observation sanctum. Through fractured glass, he stared at the Emperor's stars. The Astronomicon, that holy beacon, now flickering like a dying candle. If you are the light, he whispered, "Then why does your flame fear thunder?" No answer came, only the distant roll of storm across the warp. On Terra, the Custodes could no longer deny what they felt. The Emperor's psychic pulse, the very heartbeat of mankind, had changed rhythm. Once steady as eternity, now it trembled, as if listening. Within the throne room, one custodian dared speak. He is not weakening. He is remembering. Others turned their gaze away. To think the Emperor could remember something beyond his own sacrifice was heresy too great to name. The ecclesiarchy's sermons grew louder, desperate. They declared all thunder blasphemy. Chaplains wielded flame and chains, shouting, "The storm is deceit. The lightning is the laughter of demons." And yet, among the lower orders, scribes, janitors, soldiers, something began to stir. A secret brotherhood, nameless and scattered, passed whispers through tattered prayer books. They marked their palms with faint lightning scars and called themselves the Remembered Dawn. Sister Amara had become their symbol. Her name now sacred, her image carved into chapel walls beside saints erased by the Inquisition. She wandered from world to world, unseen yet ever present, a shadow cloaked in stormlight. Some said she carried half the hammer now. Others said she carried only its memory. But wherever she walked, faith awoke like old embers catching wind. On the forge world of Belkan Theta, she was found standing upon the ruins of a manufactorum, her cloak heavy with rain. Before her knelt thousands, laborers, machine priests, even a few Astartes stripped of insignia. She spoke without shouting. The Emperor built a throne of sacrifice, but it was never meant to be eternal. He does not need worship. He needs freedom. The crowd trembled. One whispered, "Then who do we serve?" She looked skyward, the one who will remind him who he was. Within days, orbital bombardments reduced Belkan Theta to dust. The Adeptus Terra erased all records of its existence. Yet the lightning storms above its ashes would not fade. For centuries, ships passing through that sector would report a voice carried by static. "Rise, my children." Varn heard it too. The shard inside him vibrated with every echo of those words. He found himself unable to pray, not out of blasphemy, but out of confusion. The Emperor had been his reason, his truth. But what if the truth had been bound? He ordered his ship toward Terra, to speak with the only being who could answer. But the warp had other plans. The storm came without warning, a sea of light devouring darkness. Within it, he saw faces, saints, primarchs, lost heroes. They were not suffering, they were waiting. And behind them, a figure of lightning, crowned not by power, but by sorrow. The voice spoke again. The throne was never meant to be forever. He was never meant to be alone. Varn screamed, "Who are you?" The storm answered, "A memory he buried to protect you." When the ship re-emerged, it was not near Terra, but over the broken glass of Vandros Ix. Only now, the world was whole again. Green valleys shimmered where once there had been ash. Rivers flowed with light. And standing upon its surface was a figure. The thunder had returned, in flesh. Word spread faster than light. A god walking again among men. Some said it was Thor reborn. Others said it was the Emperor himself, risen to judge the faithful. Entire sectors rebelled or repented overnight. But the truth was stranger and far darker. Thor was not whole. He was fractured, his essence split between those who had carried his echo. Varn, Amara, even the faithless who dreamed of him, all bore fragments. When he walked now, the storms behind him carried whispers of countless voices. He was a god built not from divinity, but from memory, a reflection of mankind's hunger for mercy. As he walked the renewed Vandros, flowers grew from glass. Children touched his hands and felt warmth for the first time in generations. But above, the warp churned violently. The chaos gods screamed in rage, for this light was not of them, nor of the Emperor. It was something else, older, freer. Khorne's legions tore through reality to end it. The sky fell. Demons poured like red rivers through the clouds. Thor stood silent until the first of them touched the ground. Then lightning answered, a storm that sang. Every strike was a note in a forgotten hymn. Varn and Amara fought beside him, mortal and divine united, as the world itself shuddered. Yet amidst the chaos, Thor's expression changed. Pity, regret. This is not their war, he murmured. He raised his hammer, not to destroy, but to remember. The lightning spread across the warp, illuminating horrors unseen. For a single moment, every demon, every soul, every living mind in the galaxy saw the truth. The Emperor's light was borrowed. The power that fueled the Golden Throne was not merely psychic might, but the sacrifice of another being. A god bound beneath the palace, one whose name had been erased. Thor's light. When the Emperor had ascended, he had consumed the Thunder God's strength to ignite his eternal beacon, not out of malice, but necessity. And in that act, Thor had been forgotten, buried beneath faith, waiting for mankind to call him again. Now memory became resurrection. The realization shattered the Imperium. Entire systems renounced their loyalty. Chaplains tore their own tongues. Astropaths went mad, hearing two heartbeats within the warp, the Emperor's and the Thunderer's, beating in conflict. On Terra, the Golden Throne cracked. Custodian Tyron Vale stood before it, trembling. From behind the web of gold and cables, he heard a voice unlike the Emperor's. "Set me free, brother," it whispered. "He cannot rise while I remain in chains." Vale dropped his spear. For the first time in 10,000 years, the palace knew doubt. Across the galaxy, Thor faltered. His body flickered like broken lightning. Amara screamed his name, but he only smiled. If he remembers me, then he can finally rest. The storm dimmed. The demons recoiled. For in that instant, the Emperor stirred, and in his hollow eyes, something human flickered once more. A single tear fell from the Golden Throne. Varn watched as Thor dissolved into light, becoming both storm and memory again. His voice lingered only as thunder across the void. There was never one God, only one purpose, to remember what it means to be human. Then silence. The Astronomicon blazed brighter than ever, but its light was different, softer, warmer, a beacon not of domination, but of remembrance. Pilgrims wept. Soldiers laid down their arms. And in the halls of Terra, a whisper passed between the trembling priests. Did the Emperor just breathe? Varn collapsed, the shard within him turning to dust. He saw visions of the Imperium without chains, of humanity unafraid of its gods. He smiled through the pain. But then came the voice, faint, distant, yet unmistakable. "Do you think they will thank you, Inquisitor? You have unbound a god and shaken an empire. Now you must decide which will survive." He turned. Amara was gone. Only Stormlight remained where she had stood. In that silence, Varn finally understood. The thunder was never just one being. It was the spark within all who remembered mercy. And now that spark was spreading. The Imperium would burn or be reborn by its own hand. On the edges of known space, a new light rose. Not of warp or faith, but of something older, the will to be free. Its shape flickered between human and divine, between hammer and heart. And far away, upon his throne of gold, the Emperor opened his eyes. They glowed not with wrath, but with sorrow. He whispered a single word, long forgotten, a name, brother, and the galaxy trembled as the thunder answered once more. The storm began not with thunder, but with silence. A silence so vast, it felt as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. Across the broken skies of Idolica Secundus, the ash clouds glowed faintly with the blood-red shimmer of orbital bombardment. Beneath that burning canopy, men whispered prayers that no longer had meaning. Thor stood at the edge of the cataclysm, his hammer crackling faintly in the dark. Around him, the remnants of the Astra Militarum formed a broken circle, their faith wavering between awe and terror. To them, he was neither man nor god, just another weapon fallen from the heavens, a being whose light burned too bright for mortal eyes. The earth trembled. The black priests of Mars chanted over vox amplifiers, their words twisted into static-laced hymns. "The machine god sees," they intoned, "and the machine god hungers." But even their faith trembled as the storms grew. Thor looked upon them not with pity, but with the sorrow of one who had seen gods die before. The air crackled with energy, a fusion of warp and thunder. Thor's hammer rose, and lightning split the clouds. For a moment, the darkness peeled back to reveal orbiting ships wreathed in fire. Then came the descent drop pods like falling stars, carrying Astartes in the armor of gold and ivory. Custodians of the Emperor's truth, hunters of heresy. The mortals fell to their knees. Thor did not. "Another war to cleanse the ashes?" he murmured. His voice carried through the ruin like a wound reopened. The custodian leader approached, helm in hand, his face scarred and carved with runes of faith. "You trespass upon the Emperor's dominion, Stormborn," he said, "and bring heresy in your wake." The hammer tilted, humming like a heartbeat. "Your Emperor's dominion," Thor said softly, "is built upon the bones of the innocent." His words hung in the air like sacrilege. The custodian's eyes flickered, not with rage, but with doubt. For a second, something human flashed in his gaze. Then it was gone. The first strike came from the sky, a bolt round screaming through air and stone. The battle erupted like a hymn of thunder and blood. Bolter fire tore the night apart. Lightning met flame. Power swords clashed against divine steel. And through it all, Thor moved like a storm given form, every step a quake, every breath a storm wind. But even gods bleed. A lance of plasma struck his shoulder, scorching divine flesh. He roared not in pain, but in defiance. Yet behind him, soldiers screamed and burned. Civilians fled into the dark, their faith shattered, their prayers unanswered. Above it all, the custodian's voice thundered over Vox. "Purge the heretic. Burn the false god." In that moment, Thor saw the truth of their faith. It was not devotion, it was fear, bound in armor and ritual. Their emperor was not a savior. He was a cage. When dawn came, the city was dust. Corpses lay like offerings upon a world of ruin. The custodians were gone, recalled by unseen command. Only Thor remained, kneeling beside the fallen. He touched a child's broken hand, his fingers trembling. The sky wept with ash. From the ruins, a priest crawled forward, his robes torn, his augmetics sparking. He carried a data slate wrapped in crimson cloth. "You must see," the priest gasped, offering it to Thor. "They lied to us all." Within the slate was an image, a sigil of the Imperium, overwritten by a mark older than mankind. The mark of Yggdrasil. Thor's eyes darkened. The thunder around him stilled. Somewhere in the depths of his memory, he heard the whisper of ravens, the echo of his father's voice, and the taste of old betrayal. "This world," he said quietly, "was not born of your emperor's hand." The priest coughed blood. "They said it was holy ground, that he made it sacred." Thor turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the sun rose red through the dust. "No," he said, "it was stolen." For days, the skies screamed with war. The Imperium sent fleets to cleanse, to silence, to erase. But every bombardment unearthed more runes in the stone that spoke of Asgard, of realms beyond Terra's reach. Fragments of myth buried beneath millennia of lies. Within the spires of the ecclesiarchy, panic spread like infection. The high confessor of Idolica knelt before a broken altar, clutching a relic shaped like a hammer. "Father of Thunder," he whispered, trembling, "forgive us. We knew not what we worshipped, but others saw opportunity." The Inquisition arrived in shadow, led by Lord Inquisitor Vale, whose armor bore the black sigil of the Ordo Hereticus. He studied the transmissions, the relics, the whispers of an ancient god reborn. "If this being is truth," Vale said, "then the Emperor's divinity fractures." And so silence was ordered. Entire cities were burned to cinders. Witnesses vanished, Vox records erased, history rewritten before it could breathe. Thor watched it all from orbit, aboard a derelict Mechanicus frigate he had taken by force. "They bury truth," he murmured, looking upon the void. As they buried the stars, his reflection shimmered in the viewport, a warrior who had once fought for hope, now trapped in a galaxy that worshipped decay. But then he felt it a presence, faint but familiar. Somewhere within the warp, a voice called his name. Not the Emperor's, not the demons, but something older. "You are not sent here," the voice whispered. "You are summoned." The thunder god closed his eyes. Lightning danced across his skin. The realization struck like cold iron. Someone had torn him from his realm, not his savior, but his weapon. Below, the Imperium continued its purge. On Idolica's last continent, loyalist and rebel clashed amidst holy ruins. Sisters of battle fought beside faithless deserters. The skies were red with fire and contrails. Amid the carnage, one soldier, a woman named Lyra, scarred and weary, whispered prayers to no god at all. When Thor descended once more, she was the last to stand before him. "If you are a god," she said, voice shaking, "then why do we suffer?" He looked upon her, his eyes filled with storms. "Because men built temples where mercy could not dwell." She lowered her weapon. "Then tear them down." In that moment, something ancient stirred within the world. Thunder rolled, and the earth cracked open. From beneath the ruins of the ecclesiarchy, machines older than the Imperium awoke titanic constructs, carved with runes not of Mars, but of Asgard. Their cores pulsed with light that was not warp, not matter, but memory. The Inquisition declared Thor a Xenos god. The Custodes prepared for total annihilation. And across the Imperium, whispers spread that the Emperor had not ascended alone, that another once shared his throne of lightning and fire. As the storm gathered, Thor raised his hammer toward the void. "If the Emperor is your god," he said, "then let him stand before me." The skies answered with silence. Then, faintly, across the galactic veil, came a single pulse of golden light, not from Terra, but from something buried deep within the warp, ancient and alive. Thor's eyes widened. The truth had never died. It had been waiting. And as the thunder roared across the void, the galaxy remembered what it meant to fear the storm. The sky split open. A scream tore through the heavens, the kind only a dying god could make. The storm fell upon Idolica like judgment. Lightning poured from orbit to earth, carving rivers of molten glass through the cities below. The air itself burned. Vox channels filled with static, prayers, and final orders that dissolved into silence. The end had come not as prophecy, but as inevitability. Thor stood upon the battlements of a broken cathedral, his armor cracked, his eyes hollow with purpose. Around him, soldiers and zealots alike knelt, blinded by light that was neither divine nor merciful. "Stand," he said softly. "If you kneel now, you will never rise again." But they did not move. Fear had become their faith. From orbit, the Custodes descended, golden meteors through crimson sky. Behind them came ships of the Ordo Hereticus, their hulls bearing the sigils of absolute authority. The Inquisition had come not to save, but to erase. Lord Inquisitor Vale spoke through the storm, his voice carried by 1,000 Vox beacons. "You are no god," he declared, "and your light brings only ruin. This world dies for your sin, Thor looked to the heavens. "No," he said, the thunder trembling with him. "It dies for yours." The first bombardment struck the horizon, holy fire raining from orbit. The ground trembled. Cathedrals fell like towers of bone. The sky was aflame with drop pods and debris. Yet amidst it all, Thor raised his hammer and drew lightning to himself, until his body blazed like a sun. "Enough," he whispered. The hammer fell. The impact shattered the sky. Energy rippled through atmosphere and void alike. Ships in orbit screamed as their reactors collapsed, engines failing in golden arcs. Custodes were thrown aside, like shadows under a nova. For a heartbeat, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. When sight returned, the world was silent. The storm had stopped. Ash drifted down like snow. Among the wreckage, Lyra crawled free from the rubble of the cathedral. Her armor was gone, her hands torn, her faith uncertain. Around her lay the remnants of both armies, gold and steel, flesh and faith, indistinguishable in death. She saw Thor standing amid the ruin, his figure shrouded in steam, his hammer buried in the earth. "You destroyed them," she whispered. "I freed them," he answered. Above them, the clouds twisted. Shapes moved within the light, vast, winged silhouettes that should not exist in the mortal realm. Warp entities stirred, drawn to the power unleashed. The veil between worlds was tearing. Thor looked upward, his expression unreadable. "They come for me." Lyra staggered to her feet. "Then fight them," he smiled faintly. "I already have." The light deepened, turning gold to crimson. From the rift descended something vast, neither demon nor god, but a presence of pure will. The Emperor's shadow, carried through the warp, burning with purpose. The air sang with his voice. "You should not have returned." Thor's eyes hardened. "You should not have forgotten." The sky itself convulsed. Bolts of psychic fire rained from the heavens, vaporizing all they touched. Thor caught them in his hands, deflecting the flames of gods with the last of his strength. He advanced through fire and void alike, until he stood at the heart of the storm. "What are you now?" The Emperor's voice asked, both everywhere and nowhere. "A memory," Thor said. "One you buried to make room for your throne." There was silence. Then came the response, softer, almost human. "And yet you returned, brother." The word struck like a blade. "Brother." Lyra watched, her mind fracturing under the revelation. The Emperor of mankind and the Thunder God were not rivals born of different mythologies. They were fragments of the same origin. Two halves of an age before memory, divided by pride and the hunger for worship. Thor's voice broke. "You enslaved them, made faith a chain." "I gave them order," said the voice. "Without me, they would have torn themselves apart. They did anyway." Lightning and golden light collided, tearing the air asunder. The shockwave leveled the mountains. Mortals below were turned to dust or light or both. And yet, for all the destruction, there was no hatred in their struggle, only sorrow. Then Thor faltered. His wounds reopened, his strength fading. The hammer dimmed. The storm hesitated. The Emperor's light grew brighter, unbearable. "You are not their savior. You are their end." Thor fell to one knee. "Then so be it." He struck the ground once more, not in fury, but in sacrifice. Energy rippled outward, sealing the warp tier and cutting the Emperor's projection from the mortal plane. The light collapsed inward, folding upon itself like a dying star. When it ended, only silence remained. The storm was gone. The rift closed. The golden fleets above lay dead in orbit, their power extinguished. The world had been saved and broken. Lyra crawled toward where Thor had fallen. The hammer lay beside him, cracked but still humming faintly. His body was stone, his eyes closed, his breath gone. She touched his hand, and the air shimmered with faint echoes, visions of realms beyond comprehension. Asgard, Terra. Two worlds, two myths intertwined like ghosts of one another. She wept quietly. Around her, the surviving soldiers, what few remained, gathered in stunned silence. They no longer prayed to the Emperor. They no longer knew to whom they prayed at all. The sky above cleared for the first time in centuries. Sunlight, real sunlight, poured through the ash. It felt alien, pure, terrifying. A voice echoed faintly through the wind, soft and broken. He is not gone, only waiting. Lyra looked to the hammer. It pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. From orbit, Inquisitor Vale watched the planet through the shattered viewport of his ship. His fleet was gone, his authority meaningless. The data logs told of heresy beyond measure, yet the truth lay too deep for words. He recorded one final entry. The Emperor was not alone, and we are all descendants of forgotten gods. Then he sealed the record under highest classification and purged the archives. The Imperium would never know. On the surface, the survivors built shrines from the wreckage. Not to the Emperor, not to Thor, to both, or perhaps to what they once were together. They called it the Shrine of the Lost Sun. Pilgrims would come, centuries later, to touch the scorched hammer and whisper prayers to the god who defied godhood. Lyra remained there until her death, guarding the relic, whispering to it when the wind carried thunder. Sometimes it whispered back, and far across the void, in the heart of the warp where light and memory fade into one, a shape stirred among the stars, vast, silent, watching, a being forged of lightning and fire, dreaming of worlds that could have been. The galaxy turned. Empires rose and fell. The Imperium endured, as it always did, through ignorance and faith. But something had changed, quietly, eternally. In the silence between stars, mortals began to dream of thunder again. And somewhere in the deep dark, where gods once walked, a voice whispered, neither promise nor threat, but prophecy. The storm will rise again. The world no longer burned. The storms had quieted, their thunder swallowed by endless gray. The air smelled of ash and rain, as if heaven itself had wept and fallen still. Where once stood the cathedrals of the Emperor and the monuments of the machine god, now lay only ruins, broken pillars jutting from cracked earth like the ribs of a dead titan. The war was over, but victory had no voice. Only silence remained, vast and patient. The shrine of the lost sun stood upon a hill of glass and stone. It had been built from the bones of the old world, forged by hands that no longer remembered why they built. At its heart rested the hammer, half buried in the earth, faintly pulsing with light. Some called it divine. Others said it was cursed. But none dared touch it. They only came to look, to remember what gods once were and what they had taken from men. Lyra was gone. Her name carved into the base of the shrine, her armor left beside it as relic and warning both. They said she died watching the dawn. They said she smiled as the sun rose, whispering words that no vox could capture. Perhaps it was a prayer. Perhaps it was a farewell. The Imperium rebuilt, as it always did. It renamed Idolica Secundus and erased its history from record. The Inquisition declared it cleansed, its heresies purged, its survivors re-indoctrinated. Yet in hidden corners of the galaxy, whispers endured of thunder in the dark, of a god who defied the Emperor and wept for mankind. Centuries passed. The ruins turned to dust, the dust to soil. New cities rose where old bones lay. But still the people dreamed of storms. They heard the faint echo of a hammer striking anvil in the sky, and they looked upward, wondering if the old gods watched or slept. A remembrancer came one day, carrying a quill made from the wing of a fallen cherub and parchment stained with sanctified oil. His ship had drifted beyond sanctioned routes, pulled by rumor more than duty. He stood before the shrine and gazed upon the hammer, the light within it pulsing faintly, like a dying heartbeat. "Tell me your story," he whispered. But the wind was his only answer. He began to write nonetheless. His ink bled across the page like shadowed water. He wrote of Thor, the Thunderer, who came not as conqueror but as savior, and of the Emperor, who once called him brother. He wrote of faith twisted into weaponry, and of mortals who died believing they served the light while kneeling in darkness. His words were not accusation nor worship. They were remembrance. Night fell, and the stars burned dim above. The remembrancer looked up and wondered how many of those lights were gone, how many suns had died, their light still traveling through the void, pretending to be alive. He realized that faith was much the same. We believe not because the light is still there, but because its ghost remains. He stayed until dawn. The hammer's light flickered once as the sun touched it, then faded to nothing. He thought it dead until he felt the faintest tremor beneath the ground, as if something vast and buried had stirred in its sleep. He smiled, though he did not know why. He left the shrine and walked toward the wastes where the horizon swallowed all direction. His words would be found later, hidden in a broken data vault, his name erased. But his chronicle endured, carried in secret by the faithful who no longer prayed to the emperor, but to something nameless, something older, purer, merciful in its silence. And so the story became legend. The thunder god became a myth, the emperor a fading light. But the question remained, whispered from world to world like a forbidden hymn. Was the storm our punishment or our deliverance? 1,000 years later, a child was born beneath that same sky. Her eyes shimmered faintly with gold and blue, her laughter echoing like distant thunder. When she cried, lightning forked across the horizon. Her mother wept, not in fear, but in reverence. "He returns," she whispered. The sky remembers. And once again, across the void, the stars flickered as if something immense had exhaled. For a heartbeat, the galaxy trembled. Vox systems failed. Astropaths screamed of light beyond comprehension. Then it was gone. Silence reclaimed the cosmos, as if nothing had stirred at all. But in that silence, hope lived again. In the archives of the Ordo Hereticus, sealed beyond access, there remains a single forbidden image, a world of glass under gray sky, a hammer resting in the soil, and a woman kneeling before it. The file bears no date, no source. Only a title, The Storm That Remembered. The chroniclers debate its meaning. Was it truth, or heresy, or both? None agree. But those who have seen it say that when the image flickers for a single frame, the figure of the woman lifts her head, and far in the clouds above her, lightning picks the shape of wings. The galaxy endures. Empires crumble. The Imperium forgets. But the storm waits beyond the veil of time, waiting not to destroy, but to remind, to ask the question no priest dares answer. If gods are born from man's faith, then what are men born from? And when the last prayer fades into silence, when the last star burns its final light, who will remember that once even gods knelt for humanity? The hammer sleeps beneath the shrine. The wind hums through its cracks like breath. Somewhere in the deep void, thunder rolls, patient as eternity. The storm is not gone, only waiting. If you felt the echo of the storm in this tale, if it stirred something ancient in you, like, share and subscribe to Stories of the Imperium Pro, and tell us in the comments. Do you believe gods ever truly die?